Welcome back to the channel and welcome back to another edition of the Spurs Chat Podcast. Of course, we are now day 12 into the January transfer window. Spurs have been busy in this January transfer window so far. So, of course, we are talking about transfers today. I'm absolutely delighted to bring back broadcast journalist Ben Jacobs back to the channel. Ben, pleasure to have you here. How are you?
Thanks for having me, Chris. Happy New Year. It's good to be back.
Well, Spurs, as I've just said, Spurs have been busy in this January transfer window. Of course, it was a very good window for Ange Postecoglou in the summer. Ben, we've made a couple of signings. Timo Werner and, of course, Dragusin have come in. What have you made of the window so far for Tottenham?
Well, I think Spurs have done their business early, which is always good. It shows you that they had a plan and they were able to execute it. Timo Werner, to me, feels like quite an inspired signing and one that allows Tottenham to think about the short term with Son away and also the longer possibility of him staying, and that's where the versatility is key. And I like now the options available to Ange Postecoglou, even with all of these injuries, because if you sort of bring Son back from the Asian Cup and then you think about the early part of the season, a fit Maddison was operating very shrewdly with Son in a more advanced position, and he benefited from the departure of Harry Kane. But Richarlison scored 5 goals in December, so you can move Son into a less advanced or central position. Richarlison can lead the line, and then when you chuck in Werner, there's all kinds of tactical game management and ultimately rotational possibilities for Ange Postecoglou in a busy half of the season upcoming, where Tottenham, for all of their fast start and all of their wobble, now have kind of stabilized about where they should be, which is challenging for Champions League football. Top 5 might be good enough. They're not even that far off first place, and Werner could make all the difference, certainly as far as Champions League qualification is concerned. I think Dragusin is exactly what Postecoglou needed. I know we heard a lot of kind of stories about Jean-Claire Todibo, and it's absolutely true that Tottenham, before the window, prioritised at least exploring that, but they got a very clear message: not for sale, barring anything astronomical. And Dragusin comes in on a 30 million euros package, whereas Todibo would have taken at least, I think, 60 million euros or somewhere in that ballpark. So Dragusin, just for the sake of making a point, half the price and gettable and early. And again, there's the depth. And he's exactly the kind of defender that Postecoglou likes. He's intelligent off the ball in his movement. He can help others in terms of recovery. He wins his fair share, more than his fair share, of aerial duels. He isn't rushed on the ball. And you'll also see a few long diagonals as well. So I think you get a very cultured defender, a very modern kind of centre-back, and someone like Mickey van der Ven, who will probably be able to slot straight into the Premier League. And then the fact that Spurs were able to fend off Bayern also, I think, is positive, because we'll hear a lot, and I was quite surprised at some of the comments on record around how Bayern was nearly too good to turn down. They were shell-shocked by the offer and all of this, because it almost implies if they'd have both come at the same time, maybe Bayern could have been successful. But none of that matters because he's a Spurs player. So if the reason why Spurs have got the player is because they did their due diligence, they moved early and they got the player to agree before Bayern can move, then regardless of who the player may or may not have picked, because he's at Tottenham, it's a positive, because again, it tells you that Tottenham are organised, Tottenham have moved fast, Tottenham have been prepared to spend money early. And these are not things under Daniel Levy that we've said in every single window. So I think it's very positive, and still could be one more to come in terms of a number 8 type midfielder.
Ben, what have you made of the comments from Dragusin's agent saying that the ultimate goal for the player is to sign for Barcelona or Real Madrid? It seems quite unprofessional, and these comments came out before he was even announced as a Spurs signing.
Well, Spurs are not a stepping stone club, and it's irrelevant saying something like that, because who knows what the progression's going to be. And if Tottenham are in the Champions League and he's playing regularly, then there's absolutely no reason to be looking elsewhere. I think, as per the comments on Bayern and how it was an incredible offer and it was a higher wage than Tottenham, all of these things are better kept private. And as soon as they come out publicly, the player inadvertently could potentially get off on the wrong foot, because everyone feels like, was it necessarily the first choice? And that's not something that people are talking about now because everyone's just excited about it. But I used the Mykhailo Mudryk example. Everyone knew publicly he wanted Arsenal. It didn't come off. He joins Chelsea. He gets off to a difficult start. And then suddenly you're saddled by those old comments of, oh, he wants to be at Arsenal. He's not invested. And now Mudryk's settled and no one's really talking about Arsenal and nobody really cares about that summer saga. So I think this will all blow over. But I also feel like when a player comes in, they need to say all the right things. Look at Sancho's move back to Dortmund. He's saying all of the right things. He's winning over the fan base. This isn't about joining a Championship League One club at 18 years of age and saying, my dream one day is to play in the Premier League or for Barcelona. That's fine because everyone accepts that there's a step up. But there's no step up from the Premier League. I don't care what anyone says. You can argue till you're blue in the face about the history of Barcelona or other clubs that have won other trophies. But once you're in the Premier League, you're playing at a peak level. And if Tottenham are challenging for Champions League or in the Champions League, you can't get any higher than that. So I think that Dragusin will probably want to distance himself from those comments. And because it didn't come straight from the horse's mouth, I also feel like any agent talk, any family talk is really irrelevant. It's time now for the player to show why Tottenham on the field have invested 30 million euros if the fee and the bonuses are paid.
Ben, when you look at the transfer business that we've done in the summer, and of course, Ange Postecoglou only come in the summer, he's transformed this football club no end in this 6 months that he's been there. What has changed, in your opinion, the way that Spurs are conducting business now? Because we've done business extremely early in summer. We're doing business extremely early now in January. And of course, when you look at all the other Premier League clubs, no one seems to be doing anything. Spurs are the front runners in this window so far. What has changed, in your opinion? And is Daniel Levy still actively involved in the transfers?
Well, I think, first of all, anyone that says Levy isn't involved may be true in the sense that he's perhaps trying to delegate a bit more and it's a new team being built. But Daniel Levy will always have a say, whether directly or indirectly. Bedag Eghbali, the same at Chelsea. Sir Jim Ratcliffe coming into Manchester United, sporting control. You might hear it's Jean-Claude Blanc or Dave Brailsford, but Ratcliffe doesn't pay that money, Eghbali doesn't pay that money, and Daniel Levy, who's been at the football club for so long, doesn't hold his position and not have a say. So I think the first difference is actually not under Postecoglou and this new team, but under Conte. And they qualify for the Champions League, and then extra money was invested, and suddenly Spurs signed seemingly about 100 players. I lost count after Jed Spence, which was the 6th Spence signing announcement, and then it was like 7, 8, 9 or however many. So that was the first kind of change. And then I think that the departure of Harry Kane, even though he's not been, in inverted commas, replaced yet, definitely sent a message to Spurs in the last window that they had to do some business, and that might not be down specifically to Kane and a positional replacement, more just the fact that you're bringing in money and decent money, so to not spend it feels a bit redundant. And I feel like that's spilled over into this window. The other reason is obviously not the planned one. There's been injuries. And if Tottenham didn't have so many players out, then they probably wouldn't have moved. But everybody knows that Postecoglou needs some reinforcement. So we need to wait and see, because if Spurs qualify for Champions League, the following summer they'll be busy as well. And it will all feel like there's been a strategic shift, but it might actually just be down to getting into the Champions League, spending, having a bunch of injuries and upheaval and spending, then having a bit more freedom in January and spending, qualifying for Champions League again and spending, and then it might all stop or at least stabilize anyway. So that, I think, is my sense, that nothing is set in stone, and Levy is always still going to have a say, but there's a lot of trust in Lang and in Munn and in Postecoglou, all of whom are obviously relatively new, and Tottenham are still sort of building that dynamic. The final point to note is just when you have a recruitment team and a manager that are prepared to be flexible, Daniel Levy is prepared to be flexible. So when Antonio Conte was kind of very publicly almost trying to get himself sacked, press conference after press conference, he was constantly having little jibes here and there about the ownership, about the club, about the need for like established talent. And Conte's big problem, to my understanding, was for all of those Spurs signings in the summer, how many of them were almost indisputably dropped into your starting 11. they were debatable. They were squad players. They were depth players. Some of them have done very well, but not every single one you said, wow. Whereas, like, again, when Chelsea sign Enzo Fernandez, you say they're investing in him to start. When they sign Caicedo, it's the same thing. Even Manchester United, who wanted Kane, when they brought in Højlund into the starting 11. When Arsenal signed Declan Rice into the starting 11. Kai Havertz splits opinion, but predominantly into the starting 11. Go back to that summer with Spurs, and I would say the majority were not automatic drop into the starting 11, but they signed so many that, of course, some were. And Conte's feeling was go and get me the players that I've just mentioned, or alternatively, an equivalent for the prices that we've touched upon. With Postecoglou, I think he's more flexible. I think he's more short-termist, which is not in any way critical. I mean, he's well aware of what he has to do now to get Spurs in with their best chance qualifying for the Champions League. So you've come off the back of a good summer where even though Kane left, Maddison, absolutely the opposite of what I've mentioned, straight into your starting 11 when fit. Van de Ven, straight into your starting 11 when fit. So that's a shift. It might just be smarter recruitment. And because you have that, you can now sort of start to work around the squad because you're actually happy with your fit first 11. Predominantly Vicario, again, straight into the starting 11. You'd expect that from a goalkeeper, but there were many maybe that didn't know Vicario and said, that's not going to work out. Why did they not pursue David Raya harder? How on earth have Arsenal managed to get him when we were told an expensive price and they've got a structured loan deal where they're not even obligated to buy? But again, hindsight tells you that Vicario was a great spot and he's been brilliant for Tottenham. So you got those three players in Van de Ven and Vicario and in Maddison that are not like the previous summer under Conte and actually have been very useful in helping form a bit of a spine around the Spurs team. So then you can be busy in this January because you don't need everyone to be an automatic starter. You're looking to fill in the gaps. You're looking for a bit of quality here and there. You're looking to cover some absences because of AFCON and the Asian Cup. And maybe Postecoglou is saying to Levy and his recruitment team, go and get me Werner. And we don't need to be committed to buy. We'll have an option to buy, but it's a loan. Go and bring in Dragusin. He's a centre-back I can use, but maybe when everyone's back, he'll have to settle for a squad place, at least to begin with. And when that manager's prepared to find economical solutions, short-term solutions, optional solutions, or abandon Todibo and not put his foot down and say, well, that was my choice, and instead say, okay, let's just move on. Let's be decisive. Let's go for Dragusin because we can get him in a week instead of having to wait a month and then still maybe not get him. I think that helps. So the relationship between Postecoglou, his recruitment team, and that recruitment team and Levy, I think is much more fluid and is much more flexible. And that's leading to opportunism and a flurry of business.
Ben, it seems to be a very, very different feeling right now at Tottenham, and the way that we're conducting business in it being very, very clever business, as I would put it, because Timo Werner on loan with an option to buy at the end of the season if it works out, and the way that Eric Dyer has just gone out the club to Bayern Munich, the way that he's left on a loan, but you know it's like a free transfer if you like, because he was going to be out of contract in the summer. Who's behind all this? All these decisions and this cleverness and the way that we're conducting the business at the moment, because it does seem to be very different to what we've done before.
Yeah, I think it's just because it's a new team. It's different because it's new. I'm not buying this Paratici's still pulling the strings. It's true that he's on an ad hoc consultancy contract, but that doesn't mean that he's across all transfers or that he's seen to be the future of the club. It's more a transition that you're planning 2-3 windows ahead. Every club is. So you need the guy that was planning for those 2-3 windows to be able to have an input. But this is really about the new team. We've already mentioned the names, and it's about freedom to challenge. So Postecoglou has some authority, but ultimately the recruitment experts, anyone new they bring in, and Levy are all, to my knowledge, inputting as well. And it's not about a change in strategy. It's about a change in personalities, because there was so much friction between Conte and Levy. And I actually think Paratici contributed to that, because his role was basically two roles. It was like a general manager and a sporting director. So he was in between Conte and effectively ownership. And that is how a lot of managers want it, including Conte. But it means when you don't get what you want, it's quite difficult to have an honest, frank conversation. You would think you just pick up the phone, but I don't think Conte would have picked up the phone to Levy or had a meeting with Levy without Paratici. And Paratici wants to be able to put a bit of distance because he's being judged. So can he pin it on the manager in a meeting with Levy? And from what I'm told, it was very fragmented. It was very effective. And it was exactly the way Conte wanted it, by the way, because he had a great relationship with Paratici, but not necessarily the right relationship with Daniel Levy to be open and to be flexible, which is not a bad thing in his mind because he wanted set targets in a set way. And if he didn't get them, there was nothing or there was a problem. Whereas I think Postecoglou, as you sort of see from his public demeanor, is very much like, look, this happens and it benefited us. This happens and it doesn't benefit us. We roll with the punches. We find a solution. We find a quick solution. So it's more about dynamic and personality changes than strategy changes, but the dynamic and personality changes lead to a strategy change because everyone just feels like it's a bit more collaborative at Spurs at the moment. And I think that's what's leading to good business.
Ben, you mentioned on X yesterday about Conor Gallagher, possible move to Tottenham from Chelsea. He's a player that we've been linked with heavily in the last couple of months. Can you actually see that happening either in this window or the summer?
It's a complicated situation because Conor Gallagher wants to stay at Chelsea ideally, but if he's not given a new contract either in this window, after this window, or in the summer, he starts to obviously feel like he's surplus to requirements. And to explain to Spurs fans who may not be as aware of this, the situation can be summed up as now versus future. So right now, Conor Gallagher's integral to Chelsea. He's the captain. Ben Chilwell may be back for Fulham, but Chilwell's been out, vice-captain. Reece James has had surgery, so he's also missing. So Gallagher is not just a Chelsea player and a form player, probably second only to Cole Palmer. He's also captain. So if you're Pochettino, you're in the now camp because he's performing and he's your captain. And if you're Gallagher, you're thinking, I'm getting minutes, I'm the captain. So surely they're going to offer me a new deal or they value me. And that's the now. But the future part is Chelsea's policy for everyone very dispassionately is if you're heading into the final 18 months, if you're under 2 years, basically in your contract, then you are in inverted commas for sale. That doesn't mean transfer listed. It means they will listen to offers. And that will only change if Chelsea decide to advance contract talks. And that hasn't happened with Gallagher to date. So it's a strange situation because Gallagher must feel like he's integral, he's leading, Pochettino loves him, where's the new contract? And yet it's being delayed because of the future. And that is because it's a 4-2-3-1. Gallagher's not going to play in a more advanced position because you've got Cole Palmer and Nkunku that can play in the central part of that three. So he's only really got selection, unless the formation changes, 2 midfield spots. And if everyone's fit, Chelsea have got Enzo Fernandez, Moises Caicedo, Romy Alavia, all three they've invested heavily in. They've got Leslie Okwachuku, and they're still planning in the next 2 windows and bringing in one more midfielder. So if you look at Chelsea now, you say they're nuts to sell Gallagher. But if you look at Chelsea in 6 months, including Gallagher, they might have 6 midfielders competing for 2 spots. And then Gallagher's a pure profit sale. So it may be that the long term wins over the short term, despite the fact that Pochettino wants to keep Gallagher. And if you're Gallagher, you can just block the move. And he may do that in January. But Ian Maatsen blocked a move at the back end of the last window when Burnley had an offer accepted and then didn't get any game time. And now he's obviously left on loan for Dortmund. So players change their mind. It's all very well saying you want to stay at Chelsea and you want a new deal. But if Chelsea don't offer a new deal, eventually you start to think, yikes, they don't value me. So that's why it's a fluid situation. I know that sounds complicated, but there's just so many variables. So now coming back to Spurs in that context, Tottenham bid, or were going to bid, about 35 million in the back end of the last window on deadline day. And that was their top end. And they felt that anything else for Gallagher was too expensive. Now Gallagher's at least 45 million. And I'm told that's guaranteed. So there could well be bonuses on top of that. So you've got a ballpark of 45 million to 60 million, depending on structure. And I wouldn't get too sucked into an exact number because, you know, the better payment terms you offer, the better structure you offer, the easier the add-ons are, and so on. It all defines the final number. But depending on structure, somewhere in that 45 million minimum, 60 million maximum is the ballpark that Chelsea will consider an offer for. And I think Tottenham are going to be looking at that and saying it's at least 10 million more than we wanted to pay only a few months ago. So the admiration is real. The notion in Italy that talks have already started at the time we're live is not real. It wouldn't surprise me if Tottenham still explore this one and see whether Chelsea's price is rigid or flexible. And even if it doesn't happen in January, I think he's available on the market in likelihood unless new deal talks progress in the summer as well. So it's absolutely one to watch. And it's also true that if Spurs are going to bring in one more, I would expect them to bring in a midfielder. But I just think that because Chelsea are not saying to Spurs, you can have him, they're saying, we're going to do nothing. And if Spurs come calling, we'll consider it. The ball is very much in Tottenham's court.
You don't think it's an issue with Chelsea dealing with Spurs then, Ben?
No, not at all. And I also understand that Gallagher would have probably moved last summer if Spurs had been more aggressive. Because again, at that point, he wasn't the captain. He wasn't getting the game time. I mean, he'd had the armband a few times, but I think he felt like there was a situation in the back end of last window where Chelsea was sort of saying, look, if they place this offer, we would suggest you go. Now the dynamics changed. Pochettino's played a big part in that. But I see absolutely no reason why Chelsea wouldn't do business with Spurs. They did business with Arsenal for Kai Havertz. And this new ownership, as respectful as they are with the on-field rivalry, I think their only concern at Chelsea at the moment is business and finances. So whoever comes calling stands a chance of doing business with Chelsea. And I certainly don't think that London rivalries will make the blindest bit of difference, because if Chelsea's number is hit, then it's such a good number for Chelsea that they'll almost have no choice if that number is hit, but to accept it, Spurs or otherwise. And then it will all be on Gallagher to decide whether to roadblock the situation and revisit in the summer and hope that between now and the end of the season he gets a new contract, or alternatively to speak honestly to Chelsea's owners, who may say to him, listen, Conor, there's nothing forthcoming. And then Conor Gallagher's position may change. So this Gallagher wants to stay at Chelsea. Gallagher wants to fight for his place. It's true to my knowledge, but obviously only if he feels that he's got a long-term future and eventually he's going to be rewarded with a new deal. If he's fighting for his place, leading the team, playing well, challenging for England, and then still there's no deal, at some point the player, much like Mason Mount, is going to feel like he just has to go because the performances and the commitment to the club are not being rewarded.
Ben, just very quickly, because I've got a lot of names to throw at you. Do you believe then that Postecoglou is after one more signing and that will be a midfielder in this window? Is that your belief?
That's my belief, yes. I think he wants a energetic midfielder that can be tenacious, that can play number 8 and or number 6. And that sort of fits Conor Gallagher in many ways. Beyond that, I don't see Spurs doing a great deal of business. I know that some people feel like another winger or attack-minded player could be beneficial, but Werner's versatile. Son's coming back ultimately in February. He's pretty versatile. And maybe most importantly in all of this, I know it's only 1 month, but Richarlison ended the year scoring goals. And I think that makes a big difference. Had Richarlison not got a goal in December, then Maddison comes back and you almost feel like you have to let Sonny lead the line because he was so effective there. Richarlison gets benched, and then you feel like in that wide forward or winger or creative-minded area, there's maybe room for one more. But because Richarlison is a firm option to be starting and leading the line, and therefore Son can drop deeper and wider, Maddison comes back from injury, and you've got Timo Werner, I just wonder whether the urgency to bring in a, whatever you want to call it, winger, creative-minded player, versatile forward, because it just sort of depends on the player. I'm not sure that that's as high up on Spurs' list, especially with only, 3 weeks left of the window.
Ben, I'm going to throw a lot of names at you now. Give me a yes or a no, or any clubs interested that you know of. Sergio Reguilon, any interest in him at the moment?
I think there's interest, and I think that Tottenham, by the way, knew that this was a very likely scenario. So Manchester United were very clear with the loan terms that there would have to be a break clause. And then there was this realistic possibility as Luke Shaw returns that this was only going to last for 6 months. So Tottenham would have preferred it for the season, but ultimately they were always likely to bring him back in January. I'm not aware at the moment of anything advanced with any club, but there's interest in him from inside the Premier League. And also, I'm told, in Serie A as well. But it's about minutes for the player. You know, the appeal for Reguilon was going and playing, even if it was temporary. Whereas there's clubs, for example, like Chelsea, if you want to sort of come up with a conspiracy, if you like, then I know this is a neat narrative and there's nothing advanced as far as I'm aware, but there's a whole kind of irony here of Manchester United wanted Cucurella and they couldn't get him, and then they turned to Reguilon. He returns in January. Meanwhile, Chelsea get rid of Lewis Hall to Newcastle and they loan out Maatsen, and Ben Chilwell may play in a more advanced position, and Levi Colwill is not overly comfortable, in my opinion, at left back. So now Maatsen's gone. The feeling is Chelsea need to add a fullback. And maybe if you were putting a neat narrative together, you would say Spurs will come calling for Conor Gallagher and they'll try and throw Reguilon into the package to go to Chelsea in some capacity. And it would actually make a lot of sense on paper, but unfortunately that is just a fiction at the moment because there's no suggestion that Chelsea are in for Reguilon. I heard that Roma were considering him, and I've also heard about a little bit of interest coming from Turkey as well. But once again, the clubs looking are often quite well stocked. Whereas I think for Reguilon to go, he needs minutes. And if he's not going to get minutes, then he's almost going to be against that possibility.
Ben, is there any truth in Spurs being interested in Blackburn midfielder Adam Morton and Middlesbrough midfielder Hayden Hackney?
Hayden Hackney, absolutely. And he scored and shone in that League Cup semi-final first leg win over Chelsea. And that could well be a move as far as the summer is concerned. I don't see him going mid-season, not from talking to sources. But you've always, got a little bit of an advantage being a Premier League club when you're trying for somebody from the Championship. So that could absolutely be one to watch in 2024. The interest on Spurs' part is concrete. With Wharton, I'm still told Palace, but Palace are looking at every midfielder under the sun, but I'm told that they're more aggressive at this point. I think Spurs are well aware of Wharton, and also the fact that he's got maybe a bargain fee, be certainly under 20 million, and some say it's as low as 10. I think the reality is probably somewhere in the middle, but definitely not above 20 million. And a hot prospect for the future. And it makes a lot of sense to me. This might again be one for the summer, but Tottenham may have to escalate if an Everton, despite their financial situation, or a Palace choose to move. And the reason why I flag Wharton is because Tottenham's preference was to sign Alex Scott, who ended up going to Bournemouth. And they got sucked into a race of sorts on the player side anyway, although I'm not aware that they made a formal bid in the end for Alex Scott. But they got sucked into a race on the player side, and they felt that Wolves were pushing and Bournemouth were pushing, and they were maybe not front runners. And then they explored other options. And Alex Scott ended up joining Bournemouth, and he's going to be a phenomenal prospect. And I think that with Wharton and others of that profile, there's still that gap that they're looking to bring in. So I'm not surprised by these links, but I'm also not aware with Wharton what may or may not be possible in the month of January. I think Hackney is a bit further along in terms of Tottenham's clarity and their work on the player side, but neither yet have had a formal offer placed. And it might be a reactive thing. They might be happy to wait until the summer, but they might have to react because they may realise that another suitor moves. The other player Tottenham are looking at, a different kind of player to the ones that we've mentioned, but just to throw you another young name, is Casey McAteer at Leicester. And they really like him, but obviously he started well for Leicester. Then he had an injury, And with Leicester flying, they're likely to get promotion to the Premier League. So I'm not so sure anything there will be possible in 2024, simply because the player is in the right place for his development. And if Leicester get promoted, which is looking relatively certain, then why leave for Spurs and probably get buried within their squad system for a season or two, comparative to playing regularly for Leicester. But he's another one that they really like. And again, he's a very Ange Postecoglou-like player.
Ben, when you mentioned about Crystal Palace looking at midfielders, there was a report today about them looking at Oliver Skipp. Any truth in that?
Yeah, I think that Palace, like I say, have got 5 or 7 options on their list. So it wouldn't surprise me if Skipp comes into their consideration. I also think that Palace are not necessarily only thinking about permanent midfield signings. To give you an example, Andre Santos on loan is one possibility, but they're going to have to guarantee first that he can get the minutes, and nothing is going to happen unless Palace can say to Santos and Chelsea, you're going to be able to play. I'm not so sure with Skipp that anything's going to be possible. I think at this stage, I would be surprised if Tottenham makes Skipp available for any loan. So regardless of any Palace interest, and as I say, you've got loads of names on the list because there's not much time in the window and they want to try and bring in bodies. But Skipp on loan, I would say, has a low probability because I don't think that Tottenham are thinking in those terms.
Ben, very last question, very quickly. Would you expect any other players to go out of Tottenham, either on loan or on a permanent transfer in this window?
I think it could be quite quiet now. Tottenham have done a lot of their business incomings and outgoings, but Højbjerg is the one. Yeah. So that's the sort of feeling that maybe if they are to definitively move for, let's just say, Conor Gallagher, or alternatively bring in any other midfielder, they might need Højbjerg to go first. So that's probably the big story. And we need to understand as the window progresses whether Spurs are going to resolve his situation and then look for a midfielder, or whether they feel they can bring in a midfielder and be calm whether Højbjerg stays or goes. Atletico Madrid in the last summer window felt they were getting close, and Diego Simeone was really frustrated by the fact that that didn't get over the line and the player wanted the move. But now Atleti are not at the table, and they feel that the terms being offered from Spurs for the transfer are not feasible, even though they had it almost agreed on the player side. We hear a lot of talk about Juventus for both Højbjerg and Phillips, and it has been explored, but both of those names not possible, again, due to the kind of terms. From Juventus' point of view, it's not just about what Spurs would want, it's also about the wages on the player side as well, because Juventus' financial situation is a little bit perilous. So Højbjerg, again, doesn't have a concrete option at this point. There's a few clubs looking, and I think we'll see like a merry-go-round of movement where we might be quite surprised, because people always say, well, what clubs are looking? But that's not the phase of the window we're at. You've either pre-planned your business like Spurs and got it done, or you're working on business. And now we're heading into a lull. And then in the last sort of 10 days of the window, you get a yikes, I didn't get the player I wanted. Now I'm going to turn my attention to effectively a new target or a plan B. Or you find that Tottenham are being difficult to, let's just call it a Juventus with Højbjerg, but then actually they realize, well, we have got the midfielder we want, so now we're going to soften our stance on Højbjerg. So the last week of a window, but particularly January, because it's such a short window, is really unpredictable. And therefore, clubs come out the woodwork. Clubs don't get their A target. They move for a B target. Or alternatively, the selling club decides, well, we need to move ourselves. So we were really bullish and you walked away, but now we're actually going to come back to you and say you can have Højbjerg on the terms that you wanted. So I wouldn't rule out an exit as a result of that. I wouldn't even entirely rule out Juventus returning to the table because of the point that I've just mentioned. But right now, there's nothing advanced or concrete, but it wouldn't surprise me if that changes between now and the end of the window.
Ben, I know how busy you are in the January transfer window, so thank you so much for your time and such a wonderful update. Where can people find you on social media and what you're up to at the moment?
Talk sport for me. I'm commentating on the Premier League. I've got Manchester United against Spurs actually at the weekend. So I'm looking forward to that one. And you can find me on Twitter, or X as it's now known, at JacobsBen. You can find me on Instagram. Bit more transfer content. It used to just be dog pictures and family pictures, but this window is the first one where I'm actually using Instagram feeds. So do give me a follow via @BenDavidJacobs.
Well, Ben, thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of the window, and hopefully we'll have you back again very, very soon. Thank you very much. Thanks for watching, everyone. Thanks for listening. And until the next one, come on, you Spurs.